I sit in my favorite chair by the window and watch Christine take a picture of my and Roger's wedding from the wall. 50 years ago, we stand on the steps of St. Michael's Church in downtown Northport. Me in a simple white satin dress my mother spent 3 weeks sewing. Him in the only suit he borrowed from his older brother David. In the photo, we smile shyly and a little apprehensively, snuggling up to each other as if trying to fit all of our young love into one black and white frame. A photographer was an expensive pleasure back then, and we saved up money for a professional shoot for a long time, denying ourselves trips to the movies and ice cream. Now, this photo, dear to my heart, is in a large cardboard box with the rest of the family photos that Christine has been methodically pulling off the shelves and walls for the second hour in a row. She works quickly and decisively, like someone who knows exactly what she's doing and why. Instead of our wedding portrait, Kristen hangs her studio photo in a massive silver frame that she bought at an expensive decor store last week. In the photo, she smiles the professional smile of a glossy magazine cover model, and her brown hair is styled in large curls like a 40s Hollywood movie star. The makeup is flawless, every eyelash is in place, and the lips are painted with bright red lipstick. The frame is heavy, shiny, with ornate patterns around the edges, completely inappropriate for the delicate floral wallpaper Roger and I had put up in this living room 20 years ago. We'd spent a week picking out the pattern at the building supply store, arguing over which one would fit better and not get boring in a few years. "Brian, hand me the hammer," Christine said, not looking in my direction. "The nail needs to be hammered a little higher here. Otherwise, the frame hangs crooked and spoils the whole view of the wall." My son silently gets up from the couch, where he was reading the newspaper, and obediently goes to the pantry for tools. He's 46 years old, works as a technician in a chemical plant, drives his own car and has a credit card, and acts like a teenager who's been told to put his toys away. When Brian was really a teenager, I used to dream that he would find a nice, kind girl to be my second daughter and a helper in the house, a girl to drink tea with in the kitchen, discuss recipes and weekend plans with. Kristen came into my son's life 3 years ago when he was working as a technician at a chemical plant in nearby Sarasota. She was a customer at the auto service shop across the street from the plant, coming in to touch up a deep scratch on the rear bumper of her bright red late model sedan. Brian was just getting off work from the evening shift and saw the beautiful woman arguing with the mechanic over the color of the paint. Even then, I thought it was too bright, too conspicuous for my quiet, shy son, who always preferred to stay in the shadows. Christine worked as a beautician in one of the most expensive beauty salons in town, specializing in complex facials and earning more money than Brian. She wore high stiletto shoes even on weekdays, painted her nails the color of burgundy wine, and changed her hair color every 3 months. She spoke fast and assertive, laughed loud and booming, and gesticulated with long false nails adorned with rhinestones and intricate designs. But Brian was literally glowing with happiness when he brought her to visit us on Sundays after church. He talked about her work, about the interesting people who came to her salon, how she could turn ordinary women into beauties. Christine was polite and even sweet, praising my pies, asking about my family photos, asking questions about Roger's youth and my work as an accountant. So I kept quiet about my doubts and tried to accept my son's choice. After Roger died of a sudden heart attack, they moved into my house. Christine convinced me that I shouldn't be alone in such a large and empty house, that it was dangerous for the elderly to live unsupervised, that it was a shame for her and Brian to spend almost half the family budget on renting a small apartment when we had our own spacious place. Brian agreed with his wife and added that he would be happy to help me with housekeeping, minor repairs, supermarket shopping, and trips to the doctor. The house is really big for a single elderly woman, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious kitchen with dining area, a living room with a real fireplace, and a glazed veranda overlooking the garden. Roger and I bought it 30 years ago when we were both working and dreaming of a large, friendly family with 3 or 4 children. But fate had it differently, and it was just the 3 of us: Roger, myself, and our only son, Brian. For the first few months after they moved in, I was genuinely happy to hear human voices in the house again, to have a full meal in the kitchen every day, to have the TV on and laughter in the living room in the evenings. Life seemed to be returning to these rooms, which had stood almost empty and silent for 2 long years after Roger's funeral. But gradually, week by week, I began to notice small changes in the routine of the house. First, my favorite teacups from the antique sideboard, the fine hand-painted china my mother-in-law had given me for our first wedding anniversary, disappeared. Christine explained that they didn't go with the new tea set she'd bought at the mall on clearance. Then the crocheted capes were missing from the living room chairs, intricate patterns that my late mother had worked on all evening, counting loops and matching thread colors. Christine said they look old-fashioned and spoil the overall style of the room, which she is gradually updating. Brian returns from the pantry with a hammer in his hand and dutifully stands next to his wife against the wall. She points with her finger to the exact spot where the new nail should be driven, and he obediently raises his hand. A blow, a second, a third. The metallic sound echoes through the living room, echoing off the walls and ceiling, and I shudder involuntarily at the harshness. There are already as many nail holes, screws, and dowels in this wall as Christine has rehung paintings, mirrors, and photographs in the last 6 months. Every week, she finds a new spot for yet another decor element she buys during her regular trips to malls and design stores. "Now hold the frame steady," she says, and hangs her portrait, then takes a few steps back to critique the result. "It looks much better like this." This wall finally has a modern and stylish look. I look at the large cardboard box of our family photos that sits on the floor next to the couch, awaiting its fate. There are wedding pictures from various years, pictures of Brian in his school uniform with a bouquet of flowers for September 1st, our joint family trips to the Great Lakes when my son was a toddler and believed in fairy tales, decades of family history and memories that now fit into a plain appliance carton, ready to go into a dusty attic or damp basement with other things Kristen thinks are unnecessary. Christine notices the direction of my gaze and turns to me with that smile that never touches her eyes. There is not a gram of genuine warmth in that smile, only a polite, cold indifference to the other person's feelings. "Viola, you are well aware that the house needs to make room for new memories and new life on a regular basis, aren't you? Brian and I plan to live here for many long years, to raise our children, to welcome visitors, and the house should reflect our modern life together, not the past." She says these words so naturally and calmly, as if the fateful decision about our future together has long since been made without my input or consent, as if this house, which Roger and I had been paying off for 30 years, saving every month from my modest salary as a bookkeeper at the neighborhood health clinic, was already rightfully hers and Brian's. My son stands next to me, hammer in hand, and doesn't disagree with my wife's words. He doesn't even cast a sympathetic glance at the box of photographs that document his own childhood, his school years, and our entire family history. I slowly rise from my chair, feeling my legs stiff from sitting still for so long, and walk over to the unfortunate box. I gingerly pick up one of the pictures, a picture of 7-year-old Brian sitting on Grandpa Roger's lap in our front yard, both laughing heartily and joyfully. The boy is missing a front tooth that fell out the day before and was ceremoniously placed under a pillow for the tooth fairy. Roger then patiently taught his little grandson how to ride a two-wheeled bicycle, running beside him on the path and holding the saddle with his strong working hands. Can I keep this picture in a frame on my nightstand in the bedroom? I ask, showing the expensive picture. Christine sighs with the look of someone who has to exercise infinite patience with a cranky child asking for the impossible. Of course, Viola. Take a few of your most treasured pictures to your bedroom. Place them wherever you like. But in the common living rooms, we really need to maintain a unified modern style. Or the house will look like an antique shop. Uniform style decorating. She talks about my home in the tone of a professional interior designer discussing a commercial project with a demanding client. I nod silently and gingerly take the heavy box in my hands, feeling my heart start to beat faster from the physical effort and the growing internal irritation. The next day, Christine invites her friends over for tea. I sit in the kitchen at my usual table by the window, sorting out the utility bills and hearing chairs being set up and cups clinking in the living room. Christine bought a new tea set last week, white porcelain with a gold border that cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. She put my old rose set in the closet, saying it wasn't fit for a modern woman's reception. In the morning, she spent 2 hours cleaning the living room, rearranging the cushions on the couch, and wiping every surface to a shine. She took the crystal vase Roger and I had received as a silver wedding present from the cupboard and placed a bouquet of artificial peonies in it. Live flowers, she said, wilt quickly and make a mess. First to arrive is Sharon, Christine's colleague at the beauty parlor, a tall blonde in a tight fuchsia-colored dress and stiletto heels that clatter across the parquet like a horse's hooves. Tiffany, another beautician with whom they work in neighboring offices, appears behind her. Red-haired with bright makeup and a manicure with stones, she looks like she's going to a party, not an afternoon tea party. Both women are about 35 years old, well-groomed, with impeccable hair, as if they had stepped out of the pages of glossy magazines. Girls, come into the living room. I heard Christine's friendly voice. I'm just making the new tea I brought back from Orlando this weekend. You should try it. It's bergamot and lemon zest. It's a very sophisticated blend. They walk past the kitchen, and I see Sharon surveying the interior with the evaluating eye of a professional. Tiffany whispers something in her friend's ear, and they both giggle, probably discussing the old-fashioned furniture or the faded wallpaper in the hallway. I continue to look at the bills, but I can't help but listen to the conversation from the living room. First, they discuss work, new beauty treatments at the salon, cranky clients with their endless demands. Sharon talks at length about a woman who demanded a manicure 3 times because the color of the nail polish seemed too bright, too pale, or simply inappropriate for her mood. Tiffany complains about the new receptionist, who writes down clients incorrectly and confuses her schedule, causing her to have to work overtime. By the way, Christine says, and her voice takes on a distinctive tone, I wanted to consult with you about an important decision. Of course, dear, Sharon said. We're listening. How are things going with the move? Tiffany adds, and I freeze over the electric bill. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about, Christine replies, and I hear her put the cup on the saucer. Brian and I are seriously considering getting our own place. It's spacious, but it's not really our space, you know? Tiffany hums sympathetically. Of course I do. Living with a mother-in-law is always a restriction. My friend Melissa struggled for a year before she insisted on getting a separate place. She says it was the only time she felt like a truly married woman. Exactly. Christine perks up. Viola is a good woman, of course, and I respect her, but she has her own habits, her own rules, her own way of life. And I want to organize my house according to my own taste, you know? To hang pictures that I like, to buy furniture that I choose myself, to create an interior that reflects my personality. I stand up carefully and move closer to the door between the kitchen and the living room, trying not to squeak the floorboards. The electric bill is still in my hands, but I can no longer focus on the numbers and amounts. How does Brian feel about it? Sharon asks. He was hesitant at first, Christine admits. Men are, conservative in such matters. But I patiently explained to him all the advantages of having his own place. No one will interfere with our plans. No one will impose their rules. So, are you going to sell this house? Sharon asks bluntly. The silence lasts a few seconds, and all I can hear is the ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen and the distant sound of cars outside. Well, it's family property, Christine says finally, a slight uncertainty in her voice. Brian is the only son and heir. Sooner or later, the house will go to our family. And Viola's getting to be of an advanced age, and it's getting hard for her to maintain such a large household. Heating, repairs, cleaning, all this requires physical and financial expenses. How many rooms are there? Tiffany asks curiously. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a large kitchen, and a spacious living room with a fireplace. The lot is decent, too, almost a quarter of an acre with a garden and garage. In the central part of Northport, such properties are worth very good money. Have you looked at apartments for yourself? Sharon continued to ask. Of course, Christine said. There are some interesting options. In a new residential complex on Price Street, they are building modern one-bedroom apartments with a European layout. There's a fitness center with a gym, an outdoor pool, a 24-hour concierge and security. A real civilized life, in a word. Sounds amazing, Tiffany enthused. What does the mother-in-law have to say about all these plans? Viola is a sensible woman, Christine said confidently. She'll realize that it's best for everyone. At her age, it is much more sensible to move to a small, comfortable apartment in a special complex for seniors. There is organized medical care, social activities, and help with household chores. And the money from the sale of this house will help her to live comfortably and comfortably all the remaining years, the rest of her life. She talks about me as if I am already dying, and it is urgent to solve the issue of inheritance. I'm 72 years old. I drive a car, go to the supermarket, cook, clean the house, do the bookkeeping. Yes, sometimes my joints ache. Sometimes I forget where I put my glasses or keys. But I am far from being a helpless wreck who needs to be put in an almshouse. That's a very wise decision, Sharon said approvingly. And everyone involved in the situation will be much better off. You and Brian will finally have a fulfilling family life, and she'll have professional care and the right company of peers. That's exactly right, Christine agreed, agreeing happily. Brian was a little hesitant at first, but I patiently explained to him that it was the right and fair thing to do for all parties. Men sometimes fail to see the obvious, especially when it comes to family relationships. They move on to a detailed discussion of the interiors of the apartments in the new apartment complex. Christine talks excitedly about the floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows, the latest generation of built-in kitchen appliances, the natural oak parquet and marble surfaces in the bathroom, describes what designer furniture he wants to buy, what stylish curtains to hang, where to place a new TV with a huge screen and home theater. Will this house sell quickly, do you think? Tiffany asks practically. The realtor says it will, Christine replies. In this neighborhood, real estate is in steady demand. Young families with small children are looking for houses with large lots and separate bedrooms. We have already started to gradually tidy up some of the rooms. We plan to make cosmetic repairs. This will significantly raise the market price. How much are you going to ask for? The realtor preliminarily estimated the property at $450,000, perhaps even more. The market is very favorable for sellers. Prices are rising every month. $450,000 for the house I lived in for 30 of the most important years of my life. The house that Roger and I bought when we were very young, taking out loans and saving for months on end. for the house where my only son was born and raised, where we celebrated birthdays and New Year's Eve, where we buried pets and rejoiced in family successes. What grandiose plans you girls have, Sharon sincerely admires. Frankly, I envy such determination and practicality. Christine laughs a satisfied, smug laugh. You know, in life, you have to be able to plan your future and make informed decisions. You can't sit in one place all your life, afraid of change. I quietly back away from the door and return to my table in the kitchen. The electric bill trembles in my hands. $43 from last month. A ridiculous amount compared to the huge amount of money Christine is going to get for selling my house. Behind the wall, a lively conversation continues about upcoming renovations, buying new furniture, and the many benefits of living in a modern full-service apartment complex. Christine's friends sympathetically chime in and actively agree that a young family really needs complete independence, that older people often simply do not understand the real needs and desires of today's youth, that sometimes in life you have to make difficult, but absolutely right and reasonable decisions. An hour and a half later, the friends finally leave, leaving in the living room a persistent smell of expensive French perfume and dirty cups with tea on the table. Christine begins to wash the dishes, humming merrily to some fancy song. She is clearly pleased with herself, pleased with her ambitious plans, pleased with how easily and naturally her friends have supported all her ideas and endeavors. I sit in the kitchen and slowly mull over everything I've heard in the last hour. Slowly, all the disparate pieces are coming together into a coherent picture. Moving in with my widowed mother after my father's death, under the plausible pretense of caring. A systematic change in the familiar interior and atmosphere of the house, replacing the family photos dear to your heart with your own portraits. This is not a sincere concern for an elderly relative. It's an elaborate plan to take over someone else's property. 3 days after my friend's visit, I discovered that another item had disappeared from the living room: Roger's antique snuff box. It was a small inlaid wooden box that my late husband had received as a gift from his father on the day of his majority. Roger kept in it cufflinks, small coins as keepsakes, and tickets from concerts we'd been to together. After he died, I left the snuff box on a shelf by the fireplace, among books and family photos. Now the shelf was empty except for the new ceramic candlestick Christine had bought last week. I walked around the house, looking in every room, checking every drawer and closet. The snuff box was nowhere to be found. My heart beat faster, and I felt my throat dry up. It was one of the few things that connected me to Roger, to our life together. Christine stood at the mirror in the hallway and applied her lipstick before going to work. She was going to the beauty salon for her morning shift, and she had the contented, focused look of someone in complete control. "Christine, have you seen the snuff box from the mantelpiece?" I asked, trying to speak calmly. She turned and looked at me with slight irritation, as if I were distracting her from important matters. "Oh, that old box?" She shrugged her shoulders. "I put it away. It didn't fit in with the new living room decor." "Where did you put it?" I felt my voice start to tremble. "I threw it away, of course," Christine said with the same tone one would use when talking about a discarded package or an old newspaper. "Viola, the thing was just old and worn, and it smelled of tobacco, even though Roger hadn't smoked for 2 years. He doesn't." She talked about my late husband as if he'd just quit smoking, not died of a heart attack, as if the snuff box was just junk, not a memory of a man who had lived in this house for 30 years. "But it was a memory of Roger," I said, feeling my insides clench with resentment and anger. "I'd kept it on purpose." Christine sighed with the look of someone who had to explain the obvious to a child who was not thinking straight. "Viola, I understand your feelings, But you can't turn the house into a museum of the past. People need to move on, make new memories, not cling to old things. She closed the tube of lipstick and put it away in her purse, clearly considering the conversation over. But I couldn't back down that easily. The tobacco box was more than just a thing. It held pieces of my life with Roger. Where exactly did you throw it away? I persisted. What trash can? Christine turned to me, and something like surprise flashed in her eyes. I guess she hadn't expected me to be so persistent. Into the container in the yard, of course. But Viola, that was 3 days ago. The garbage has long since been taken away. Why would you do that? I didn't answer and quickly headed for the back door. There were two large plastic bins in the yard, one for regular garbage and one for recyclables. I opened the lid of the first one and looked inside. The container was almost empty. Indeed, a garbage truck had come yesterday. Only plastic bags with leftover food and a few cardboard boxes were lying at the bottom. But in the corner, under a crumpled frozen pizza wrapper, I saw the familiar dark color of wood. My heart jumped. I leaned deeper, carefully pushed the trash aside, and pulled out the snuff box. It was dirty, sticky from some kind of liquid, but intact. Lightwood inlay still adorned the lid, a reminder of the craftsman who'd made the thing years ago. What are you doing? I heard Christine's voice behind me. I turned around, clutching the snuff box to my chest. Christine was standing in the doorway, her face a mixture of amazement and indignation. Taking what's mine, I said firmly. Viola, that's disgusting, Christine exclaimed, wrinkling her nose. You're rummaging through the garbage like a homeless person. And for what? For old junk that I threw away for a good reason. It's not junk, I said, wiping the snuff box with the edge of my shirt. It's a memento of my husband. Christine took a few steps toward me, and I saw her face change. Gone was the usual condescending smile. Gone was something hard and unpleasant. Listen to me carefully, Viola, she said in a low voice. I'm tired of these constant scenes over every old thing. I clean the house. I put things in order. I create a normal environment for living, and you make drama every time. I'm not causing drama, I countered. I just don't want things dear to my heart thrown away. Things that are dear to your heart? Christine grinned, but it was an evil laugh. Viola, you're living in the past. Roger died 2 years ago. 2 years, and you're still clinging to his old things as if that will bring him back. The words hit like a slap in the face. I knew Roger was dead. I'd buried him. I'd cried over his grave every week for the first year. But the snuff box, his books, his chair by the fireplace, it was all part of the life we'd built together. This is my home, I said quietly, and I have the right to keep what I want in it. Christine laughed, but it was a harsh, unpleasant laugh. Your house? She repeated, and there was a sneer in her voice. Viola, let's be honest. How old are you? 72? How long do you intend to live here? 5 years? 10? I looked at her and couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman who I'd taken into my home, who I'd let move in here with my son, was now talking to me like I was an unwanted tenant. Brian and I are going to be living here for years, Christine continued, taking another step forward. I'm going to have children in this house, and I'm going to raise them. And I'm not going to turn my house into a junkyard. Your house? I asked, feeling a chill go down my spine. Christine looked at me directly, without a shadow of shyness or doubt. Of course it is. Brian is the sole heir. Sooner or later, we're going to get this house anyway. And I don't see the point in waiting until you're dead to start living a normal life. Until I'm dead. She said it as simply as they talk about the changing of the seasons or tomorrow's weather. I stood in the yard with a dirty snuff box in my hands and realized that the woman in front of me had thought I was dead for a long time. "This is my house now," Christine shouted, and her voice became shrill. "It's mine, do you understand? And I will decide what I keep here and what I throw away. You can live here as long as it suits me, but don't you dare dictate the rules." She turned and walked briskly to the car, chin held high. The door slammed shut, the engine started, and the red sedan drove out of the yard, leaving a cloud of dust behind it. I stood alone, holding the snuff box I'd rescued. Christine is right about one thing. Roger has been dead for 2 years, but I'm still alive. And as long as I'm alive, this house belongs to me. I went into the house, washed the snuff box thoroughly, and put it back in its original place by the fireplace. Then I took out the phone book and found the number of the law office of Blackwood and Associates. Edwin Blackwood had drafted Roger's will. He knew all our family affairs. "Mr. Blackwood," I said when the secretary put me through to the lawyer, "this is Viola Stanton. I need your help." Edwin Blackwood arrived at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, as we had agreed on the phone. I watched from the kitchen window as his dark blue car pulled up to the house and stopped next to the mailbox. Mr. Blackwood looked exactly the same as he had 2 years ago, when he'd helped us with Roger's will, a tall, gray-haired man in an austere suit, with a leather briefcase in his hand and the leisurely movements of a man accustomed to serious conversation. I opened the door before he could even ring the bell. We said hello, and I ushered him into the living room, offering him coffee or tea. He politely declined, saying he'd just had lunch, and settled into the chair across from the couch, his briefcase neatly placed next to his feet. "Viola," he said in his calm, professional voice, "you mentioned on the phone that there was a family situation that required legal intervention. Would you please tell me more about it?" I sat down on the couch and folded my hands in my lap. I'd been thinking a lot the last few days about how exactly to explain what had happened, what words to choose so I wouldn't sound like a hysterical old woman complaining about her daughter-in-law. "Mr. Blackwood, after Roger died, my son Brian moved in with his wife. They said they wanted to help me manage the house and the household. But today I realized they had completely different plans." The lawyer listened intently, nodding occasionally. His face remained impassive, but I could feel that he was catching every word. "Christine, my son's wife, acts like she already owns the house. She throws out my things, changes the furnishings, invites girlfriends over, and discusses plans to sell the house. This morning she told me bluntly that this is her house now, and I must obey her rules." "I see," Mr. Blackwood said slowly. "What exactly are your concerns from a legal point of view? Do you fear for your property rights?" "Yes," I answered frankly. "I don't understand what rights they have to my house and what I can do to protect myself." The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder of documents. I recognized some of the papers. They were copies of Roger's will and other documents we had signed 2 years ago. "Viola, let's remember exactly what we signed after your husband's death. The house is registered in your name as a surviving spouse. Roger's will gives you full ownership of the property." "Yes, I remember that," I confirmed. "So, legally, the house belongs only to you. No one else has any rights to it until you die or until you decide to transfer the property." I was relieved, but Mr. Blackwood continued in a serious tone. "However, there are nuances that are important to understand. If your son is considered the heir at law, the house can indeed pass to him upon your death. But this will only happen if you do not make another will." "Can I make another will?" I asked. "Of course. You have every right to dispose of your property as you see fit. You can bequeath the house to your son. You can divide it among several heirs. You can give it to a charitable organization. It's entirely up to you." At that moment, we heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out the window and saw Christine's red sedan. She had gotten home from work earlier than usual. Behind her, Brian's truck pulled out of the garage. He had come home, too. "I think your family is back," Mr. Blackwood said. "Would you like to talk to them in my presence?" I hesitated for a few seconds. Part of me wanted to put it off, to give myself time to think. But the other part of me knew there was no point in putting it off. The longer I didn't say anything, the more insolent Christine would become. "Yes," I said firmly. Let them know where they were standing. The front door opened and there were voices in the hallway. Christine was saying something to Brian, complaining about the snuff box incident. I heard separate phrases: totally inappropriate behavior, rummaging through the trash, time to make a decision. "Viola?" Brian called out. "We're home." "We're in the living room," I answered. "Come in, please." They walked in together, and I noticed the change in their expressions when they saw Mr. Blackwood. Brian looked surprised, but not alarmed. Christine frowned and looked around the lawyer as if assessing a potential threat. "Mr. Blackwood," Brian said, extending his hand for a handshake. "I didn't expect to see you. Is everything all right?" "Good afternoon, Brian," the lawyer replied politely, standing up and shaking his outstretched hand. "Your mother asked me to come here to discuss some legal matters." Christine remained standing at the door with her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't say hello to the lawyer and looked openly hostile. "What legal matters?" she asked sharply. Mr. Blackwood sat back in his chair and gestured for them to join him. Brian took a seat on the couch next to me, and Christine remained standing. "This is about the ownership of the house," the lawyer explained calmly. "Your mother-in-law wanted to clarify the legal situation." Christine and Brian looked at each other. I saw something flicker in my sister-in-law's eyes, something wary and calculating. "But it's clear," Brian said slowly. "When Dad died, the house went to Mom. And when Mom's gone, I'm the sole heir." "That's technically true," Mr. Blackwood agreed. "But there's an important clarification. Your mother has every right to change her will at any time. She can give the house to anyone she wants: relatives, friends, a charitable organization." I watched the faces of my son and daughter-in-law slowly change. Brian looked confused, as if he'd only just gotten the meaning of the lawyer's words. Christine turned pale, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "But why did Mom suddenly decide to discuss it?" Brian asked, turning to me. "Mom, did something happen?" "What happened is that your wife thinks she owns my house," I answered bluntly. "She's throwing out my stuff, plans to sell my property, and claims that I have to obey her rules." Brian looked at Christine with bewilderment. "Christine, is that what you said?" "I said we need to plan for the future," Christine said through gritted teeth, "and that we shouldn't turn the house into a museum of the past." "You also said that this was your home now," I added, "and that I should only live here as long as it suited you." Mr. Blackwood listened intently to this exchange of remarks. His professional experience must have included many such family conflicts. "Christine," he said politely but firmly, "I must warn you that legally the house belongs entirely to Viola. She has the right to live in it, to manage it, and to make decisions about its future. No one else has that right." "As long as she's alive," Christine said coldly. "Even after her death," the lawyer objected calmly. "If Viola decides to change her will, and given the conversation we've had today, I'd say that's a real possibility." Christine and Brian froze. I could see them digesting what they had heard, plans and prospects recalculating in their heads. The beautiful apartment in the new complex, the $450,000 from the sale of the house, all of that was suddenly in doubt. "Mom," Brian said quietly, "are you really thinking of disinheriting me?" I looked at my son. a man of 46 who lets his wife call the shots in his mother's house. And for the first time in years, I saw him for who he really was. Before I could answer Brian's painful question about disinheritance, we heard the sound of another car pulling up in the yard. Through the large living room window, I saw a white Hertz rental car slowly pull up right in front of the main entrance to the house, next to the bed of roses that Roger had planted 10 years ago. A tall, slender woman with short, dark hair, dressed in comfortable blue jeans and a simple white cotton shirt, stepped out of the car. She looked tired after the long drive, but determined. The woman pulled a small-wheeled travel suitcase and a black gym bag from the trunk, then walked confidently toward the front door. "Who's that?" Christine asked with an undisguised wariness in her voice, moving closer to the window and trying to get a good look at the intruder. I smiled for the first time in days, feeling a little lighter. Jessica had arrived right on time, just as we'd agreed during our long phone conversation last night, which had lasted over an hour. "This is my niece Jessica," I said in as calm a tone as possible. "The daughter of my late younger sister, Margaret. She lives and works in Portland, Oregon, but decided to visit us in Florida." Brian looked genuinely surprised and a little confused. He remembered Jessica well, of course. She had come to the funeral of his beloved Uncle Roger 2 years ago and stayed with us for a week, helping with the arrangements and sorting out the paperwork. Before that, she had been to her own mother's funeral 5 years ago, when we all grieved the loss of a wonderful woman together. But since then, we had only been in touch by phone every 2 or 3 months and occasionally exchanged long emails. Mr. Blackwood rose neatly from his chair, gathering up the papers spread out on the coffee table and stacking them in strict order. "Viola, I think this is as good a time as any for me to leave," he said in a professionally polite tone. "You're starting a family meeting, and we've already discussed all the major legal points and nuances of the situation." "No, Mr. Blackwood," I said firmly and decisively. "Please stay a little longer. What I'm about to tell you directly affects Jessica, too." The experienced lawyer nodded understandingly and settled back into his chair, though his expression became even more professionally neutral and cautious. He clearly sensed that the family drama was just beginning to unfold, and his presence might be required for legal clarification. The melodious doorbell rang twice. I got up from the couch and headed for the front door, sensing behind me the tense glances of Christine and Brian, who were obviously exchanging quick, meaningful looks. They intuitively sensed a catch in what was going on, but did not yet understand what it was. "Aunt Viola," Jessica hugged me tightly and warmly. "How are you? How are you feeling? You look wonderful despite the circumstances." "Thank you, my dear. Come on inside. We're having an important family meeting in the living room." We entered the living room, where everyone involved in the drama remained in their original seats, frozen in anticipation of the developments. Jessica said a hearty hello to Brian, whom she remembered as a teenager, nodded politely and discreetly to Christine, whom she didn't know, and shook Mr. Blackwood's hand firmly when I introduced them to each other. "Jessica works as a mid-level manager for a major travel company in Portland," I explained for background. "She specializes in organizing challenging multi-day excursions in the national parks of the Northwest Coast." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Christine said tautly and warily. "What exactly brings you to Florida this time of year? A sudden vacation or a family emergency?" Jessica settled into the easy chair in front of the fireplace and smiled the open, direct smile I remembered from her childhood and adolescence. "Not exactly an ordinary vacation," she answered quietly. "Aunt Viola had called me the night before last and told me in detail about the difficult situation that had developed here lately. I thought it would be wise for me to come here in person and look into the matter in detail." "What kind of situation?" Brian asked quickly and warily, glancing at me anxiously. "The situation with the house and the plans for the future." Jessica answered as calmly as possible. Aunt Viola had told me that some members of the family felt entitled to make plans to sell her personal property. Christine straightened instantly on the couch, her face a look of ill-concealed hostility and confrontation. "We're not forcing or coercing anyone to do anything," she said in a defensive tone. "We are simply discussing the various options for the future family structure in a reasonable manner. Viola is of advanced age, and she may well need professional help and care. I understand your concern," Jessica nodded diplomatically. "It is very noble and caring of you to think of the comfort of an elderly person. What exactly do you suggest as a solution?" Brian coughed uncertainly and looked at his wife meaningfully, expecting her to take the initiative and answer the uncomfortable question. Christine hesitated for a few seconds, obviously carefully choosing the most diplomatic words and wording. "Well, we were seriously thinking that it would be much more convenient and safe for Viola to move to one of the modern special complexes for active retirees," she began cautiously. "There is round-the-clock medical care, organized quality meals, a variety of social activities and entertainment. And this house is frankly too big and demanding for a single elderly woman." "And what will happen to the house after Aunt Viola moves to such a complex?" Jessica asked, with an emphatically innocent look. Christine and Brian looked at each other again quickly, and I could see the uncertainty in their gazes. Mr. Blackwood watched this tense conversation silently, preferring not to interfere, but keeping a close eye on every remark and reaction. "The house, of course, will remain in our family," Brian finally answered after a pause. "Logically, it should go to me as the only legal heir. What if Aunt Viola suddenly wanted to dispose of her property in some other way?" Jessica persisted. "Another way?" Christine frowned, puzzled. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Jessica turned to me and smiled encouragingly, signaling that it was time for me to show my cards. "Aunt Viola, why don't you tell them about the big decision we discussed on the phone?" I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. This was the decisive moment that I had been waiting for and dreading at the same time. The moment when it was necessary to say out loud the truth, which would radically change the whole situation and the balance of power in the family. "A month ago," I began slowly and distinctly, "I made a formal request to Mr. Blackwood to retitle this house. I no longer legally own it." The silence in the living room became so dense and tense that it felt like you could cut the air with a knife. Brian stared at me wide-eyed with shock, and Christine instantly turned so pale that the bright red lipstick on her lips looked almost garish against her suddenly chalky white face. "What? What did you say, Mom?" Brian mumbled, barely audible. "The house has been officially deeded to Jessica," I continued, feeling oddly relieved that the closely guarded secret was finally out. "She is now the sole legal owner of the property." Mr. Blackwood dutifully pulled another thick folder of official documents and seals from his leather briefcase. "Yes, it's absolutely true," he confirmed in a dry, official tone. "Exactly a month ago, Mrs. Stanton executed a deed of gift of real estate in the name of Jessica Clark. All the necessary documents have been registered in the Municipal Real Estate Registry of the county." Christine jumped up from the sofa so swiftly that she almost knocked over a tall floor lamp with a lampshade standing nearby. "This is absolutely impossible," she shrieked shrilly. "She had no right to do this. Brian is the only native son, the only legal heir by blood. She had every legal right." The lawyer calmly objected. "Viola was the sole owner of the property and could dispose of it as she pleased within the limits of the law." "Mom," said Brian in a hoarse voice, "why didn't you discuss such a serious decision with me? Why did you do everything in secret, behind my back?" "Because I've clearly seen the way you've been acting these past months," I answered with a deep sadness in my voice. You've been blithely letting your wife call the shots in my house, planning my future without my consent or involvement. You are silent when she unceremoniously throws away your late father's things that are dear to me. But I'm your only son, Brian exclaimed, and there was a desperate note in his trembling voice. Yes, you are my son, and that's why it hurts me so unbearably to see you not protecting your own mother from humiliation. Christine paced back and forth across the room like a cornered beast of prey. All her careful plans and calculations were crumbling like a house of cards right before her eyes. Look, Jessica, she said, turning sharply to her niece and trying to pull herself together. Let's talk reasonably businesslike. You live in a completely different state, thousands of miles away, and you don't need this house. We're willing to seriously discuss fair financial compensation. Compensation? Jessica asked with genuine surprise. For what exactly? For the house, of course, Christine exclaimed impatiently. We'd be willing to buy it from you at a fair market price. And what price do you personally consider fair? Jessica asked curiously. Christine thought for a few seconds, quickly calculating the family's financial possibilities. $300,000 in cash, she said with the look of someone making a generous offer. That's a very generous offer indeed for a quick transaction. Jessica laughed, not maliciously or mockingly, but with genuine surprise at what she heard. 300,000 for a house that, according to your own words, is worth 450? Quite interesting and original arithmetic. Christine blushed visibly with embarrassment and anger. Well, in a quick sale, the price is always substantially below market value. I'm not going to sell this house, Jessica said firmly. At least not to you. Brian had been silent all this time, painfully digesting the shock. Now he slowly turned to me with a look of deep bitterness and painful resentment on his face. Mother, you deceived me. All my conscious life, I was sure that the family home would be inherited by me someday, and you secretly handed it over to a complete stranger. Jessica is not a stranger, I said softly. She is my favorite niece, the daughter of my dear departed sister. But not your own daughter, Brian exclaimed painfully. I am your only child, and you disinherited me because of petty family quarrels and misunderstandings. I disinherited you because you let your wife make my life a living hell, I said quietly but clearly, because you kept quiet when she was openly planning to get rid of me and sell my property. Christine stepped toward Jessica again, and her voice was suddenly pleading, almost tearful. Jessica, you are an educated, reasonable woman. Think practically and realistically. Do you really need a house in Florida? You have a good job in Oregon, a settled life, friends, and we're prepared to offer you a really good buyout price. $500,000, Brian added quickly, clearly exceeding the family's financial means. Even more than the official market value. Jessica looked at me carefully, then at the lawyer, then back at Christine and Brian. You're absolutely right. I don't personally need the Florida house, she said nonchalantly. But Aunt Viola does, and as long as she's alive and well, she'll live in her own home, and what happens after that is another matter. There was a heavy silence in the parlor after Jessica's words. Mr. Blackwood carefully put the documents into his briefcase and rose from his chair. I think my work here is done, he said politely. All legal matters have been cleared up. Viola, if you need further advice, call me. I walked the lawyer to the door, thanked him for his help, and returned to the living room. The atmosphere was heated to the max. Christine stood at the window with her arms crossed over her chest, breathing heavily. Brian sat on the couch with his head in his palms. Jessica was quietly looking at the family photos on the mantelpiece. Well, Christine said, turning to me abruptly. Now all the cards are on the table. Congratulations, Viola. You've played a great combination. There was a venom in her voice that I'd never heard before. The mask of the polite daughter-in-law had finally fallen, revealing her true face. I didn't play any combinations, I replied calmly. I was just defending my rights and my dignity. Dignity? Christine laughed angrily. You call it dignity if you secretly disinherited your own son? That you lied to us for months, knowing we were making plans for the future? What plans? Jessica intervened quietly. Plans to sell someone else's property and send Aunt Viola to a nursing home? Christine threw her niece a hateful look. And no one asked you at all. You're a stranger here, flying in from out of state, and now you're meddling in family matters. I'm not a stranger, Jessica said calmly. I'm Aunt Viola's niece, and I own this house now. So I have every right to be interested in what's going on here. Brian finally raised his head and looked at me with pain in his eyes. Mom, I don't understand. Do you really hate me that much? Those words hit harder than I expected. I sat down next to my son and tried to take his hand, but he pulled away. Brian, I don't hate you. I love you. That's why it hurts so much to see what you've become. What I've become? He looked at me puzzled. Weak, unwilling. You let your wife boss you around, not just you, but me. You remain silent when she throws away the memory of your father. You don't protect your own mother. Christine stepped closer, her face contorted with anger. Don't you dare blame Brian. He's a wonderful husband and son. You're the selfish old woman who can't accept that the world has changed. Christine, Brian said warningly. No, let her listen. The daughter-in-law continued, ignoring her husband. We lived under the same roof with you for 2 years. We put up with your whims and habits. I tried to create a normal environment in the house, and you at every opportunity reminded that this is your territory. Because it is my territory, I said firmly. It was, Christine shouted. And now what? Now we have to humiliate ourselves in front of this? She waved her hand in Jessica's direction. This stranger, who doesn't even know what your dead husband looked like? Jessica walked calmly over to the mantelpiece and picked up one of the photographs, the one of Roger and me standing in the garden outside the house. Uncle Roger was a tall man with kind eyes and gray hair. He worked as an engineer in a factory and was very fond of raising roses. When I was a little girl, he used to show me how to graft the bushes. Christine was silent, clearly not expecting that answer. I came here every summer until I was 14, Jessica continued. Aunt Viola and Uncle Roger were my second family after my parents died. So I'm not a stranger, and I understand exactly what happened here. Brian got up from the couch and started pacing around the room. I could see him agonizing over his own feelings. Okay, he said finally. Let's say Christine was a little over the top sometimes. But is that really a reason to take away the home I grew up in? Couldn't we just talk? Explain? I tried to explain, I said sadly. Many times. But you always took your wife's side. Because she's my wife, Brian exclaimed. D. Of course I have to support her. Even when she's wrong? Jessica asked. Even when she's planning to get rid of your mother? No one was planning to get rid of her, Brian objected hotly. We just wanted Mom to have a more comfortable life. Christine walked over to her husband and stood beside him, showing a united front. Brian's right, she said, and tears came into her voice. We took care of Viola, and she repaid us with black ingratitude. Cared? I asked bitterly. Throwing out my stuff is caring? Planning to sell my house is caring? We were thinking about your future, Christine insisted. You'd be better off in a special compound. There's medical care, organized recreation. There are storage rooms instead of a house, Jessica interrupted her. Common dining rooms instead of your own kitchen. Roommates instead of privacy. Brian stopped and looked at his niece with annoyance. What's wrong with older people living among their peers? It's safer, calmer. Safer for whom? Jessica asked bluntly. For Aunt Viola or for you and your wife? For everyone, Brian blurted out, and then stopped himself. There was silence. We all realized he'd blurted it out. Indeed, the plan was for everyone's benefit except mine. Christine tried to remedy the situation. Viola, she said in a softer tone, you realize we're not enemies. We're family, and families are supposed to support each other, not hurt each other. Exactly, I agreed. Families are supposed to support each other. But for some reason, I haven't seen any support from you. What's going to happen now? Brian asked tiredly. Should we move out? I looked at Jessica. We had already discussed this during the phone call. It's Jessica's decision, I said. She owns the house now. All eyes turned to my niece. She stood by the fireplace, calm and determined. You have a month, she said flatly. A month to find another place to live and move? Christine turned pale. A month? That's a mockery. We need time to find a suitable apartment, to raise the money. You've had 2 years to save up, Jessica said, and I understand you've already looked at apartments in the new complex. But we didn't expect to have to buy them with our own money. Christine shouted and then clamped her hand over her mouth, realizing that she had said too much. Brian blushed ashamed of his wife. Jessica grinned. It's finally clear now, she said dryly. A month, no more. Christine turned and rushed to the stairs leading to the second floor. This is cruelty, she shouted as she climbed the stairs. Pure cruelty. Brian looked at me reproachfully. Mom, do you really think this is fair? I think it's inevitable, I replied sadly. Too much has been said. Too much has been destroyed. He shook his head and followed his wife. On the threshold, he turned around. I hope you will be happy in your empty house. When they left, I sat down in the chair and felt the accumulated tension leave my body. Jessica came over and put her hand on my shoulder. Is it hard? A lot, I admitted, but the right thing to do. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of slamming doors and loud voices coming from upstairs. Brian and Christine were having a heated discussion in their bedroom, and their tense conversation could be heard through the thin walls of the old house, which had been built in the 80s, when soundproofing hadn't been a priority. I slowly got out of bed, put on my favorite blue robe made of soft cotton that Roger had given me for one of my birthdays many years ago, and walked carefully down the wooden stairs to the first floor, trying not to squeak the floorboards. In the spacious kitchen, I was greeted by the pleasant aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toasted toast. Jessica was awake and cooking breakfast, standing by the old gas stove in comfortable jeans and a simple white t-shirt. Her dark hair was neatly gathered into a low ponytail, and she didn't have a drop of makeup on her face, which made her look a lot like the serious little girl who used to come to our house on summer vacation 20 years ago and help me bake pies. Good morning, Aunt Viola, my niece said softly, handing me a steaming cup of fragrant coffee. How did you sleep after last night's events? Honestly, not very well, I admitted, accepting the warm cup gratefully. I tossed and turned all night, thinking about what had happened yesterday and the words that had been said. Jessica nodded understandingly, and she too looked a little tired after an emotionally demanding day. We sat down at the small kitchen table by the window, and I felt oddly relieved that I no longer had to hide my true feelings and thoughts, to pretend that everything was okay. Aunt Viola, Jessica said quietly, scrutinizing my face, are you sure you want to see this through to the end? It's not too late to change things and find a compromise. I shook my head firmly, taking a sip of hot coffee. No, honey, some things can no longer be fixed or forgotten. Too much had been said yesterday, and everyone's true motives and intentions had become too clear. Upstairs, the raised voices gradually subsided, and after a few minutes, we heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Christine came down first, already fully dressed in a strict dark blue business suit with a pencil skirt and white blouse. Her face was carefully made up, but her pallor was still evident under the layer of foundation, and her lips were pressed into a thin, disgruntled line. Brian appeared behind her in his usual work clothes, jeans and a plaid shirt. He was going to the chemical plant for his morning shift. "Good morning," Christine said in a strained tone, heading over to the coffee maker and pouring coffee into one of her new cups. "Good morning," I replied calmly. "How are things going with finding a suitable apartment to move into?" Christine set the cup down on the marble countertop, so abruptly and carelessly that the hot coffee spilled and ran down the surface. "Viola, we absolutely need to have a serious talk right now. What happened last night was an unfortunate misunderstanding and a family conflict that could well be resolved peacefully and civilized if you were reasonable." "There was no misunderstanding last night," Jessica said calmly, not taking her eyes off her breakfast. "Everything was very clear and straightforward. You have exactly 1 month to find a new place to live." "A month!" Christine exclaimed indignantly. "This is completely unreasonable and cruel to the family. We physically can't find a decent place to live in such a short time in this city." Brian slowly sat down at the table, avoiding direct eye contact with me or Jessica. His tired face expressed the inner struggle of a man who had spent an agonizing sleepless night in heavy contemplation of the future. "Mom," he said quietly and tiredly, "is there absolutely no reasonable compromise? We are, after all, one family, one blood." "Compromise?" I asked with bitterness in my voice. "Where exactly was the compromise when your wife was openly planning to send me to a nursing home to get rid of this house?" Christine sat down across the table from me and folded her hands in front of her in a businesslike gesture. There was an expression in her eyes that was meant to portray sincerity and willingness to negotiate. "Viola, I honestly admit that some of my words and actions lately may have seemed inappropriate or even hurtful to you. Perhaps I was indeed too categorical in my statements. But any misunderstanding can be discussed quietly at the family table, and a solution can be found that will suit all participants." "What kind of solution do you propose?" Jessica asked bluntly, putting down her fork. Christine gave her niece a quick, irritated glance, but continued to speak in a conciliatory, almost ingratiating tone. "Well, for instance, we might well stay here for some reasonable time. Say, for 6 months or even a whole year. During this period, we will quietly find a really suitable apartment, save enough money for a down payment on the mortgage. And what exactly do we get in return for such a concession?" Jessica asked, businesslike. Christine hesitated for a few seconds, obviously frantically thinking about the most favorable offer. "We're willing to pay a fair rent, a reasonable rent given the family's circumstances." "How much exactly?" My niece kept up. "Well," Christine hesitated, "perhaps $500 a month. That's a fair amount for a family." Jessica laughed softly. "For a 4-bedroom house with a lot in downtown Northport, $500 a month? You're definitely kidding." Christine's face darkened visibly with irritation. "Okay, $1,000 a month. That's really very generous, especially considering the fact that we're all a family. The market rent for a house like this is at least $3,000 a month," Jessica said dryly. "And that doesn't include the electric, water, and gas utilities." Christine jumped up sharply from her chair, and the carefully maintained mask of friendliness finally fell off her painted face. $3,000. That's outright robbery and extortion. We're not just some strangers. We're family. We've been living here for 2 full years. Exactly. Jessica agreed nonchalantly. 2 years for free. I think that's more than enough for any family. Brian finally raised his head and looked at his niece with bitterness and resentment. Jessica, I remember very well when you were a little girl and came to visit us here during school vacations. Your mother used to bake your favorite apple pies for you. Your father patiently taught you how to fish in the local pond. And now you're ruthlessly kicking me out of the family home. I'm not kicking anyone out, Brian, Jessica said calmly and judiciously. I'm just giving you a reasonable amount of time to find a suitable place of your own. A month is plenty of time for any responsible adult. Christine suddenly sat back in her chair and theatrically placed both hands on her stomach. The gesture was clearly demonstrative and intended to have an emotional impact. Well, she said in a shaky voice, if you're really that cruel and heartless, then you must know the truth. You're not just throwing us two out on the street. You are ruthlessly throwing out your own future grandson. A heavy silence hung over the kitchen, like a storm cloud. I watched my sister-in-law carefully, trying to see from her face if what she had just told us was true. Are you pregnant? Brian asked in genuine amazement, turning to his wife. Christine nodded slowly, pretending to be a fragile woman in a desperate situation. It's the second month, she said quietly. I found out last week, but I wanted to tell the family at a more appropriate time. Now, do you see why stability and peace of mind are so vital to me? Brian gently put his arm around his wife's shoulders and looked at me with mute reproach and pain. Mom, are you hearing this news? You're about to have a grandson or granddaughter. Do you really want your first grandchild to be born in some rented apartment? I felt everything inside clench painfully with conflicting emotions. A grandson or granddaughter, the child of my only son, Brian, the continuation of our family lineage. But at the same time, I knew it could very well be another clever manipulative move on Christine's part. If it were true, I said cautiously, I would certainly be happy to be a grandmother. But it doesn't change the situation with the house. Christine raised her head sharply, and genuine anger flashed in her eyes. Doesn't change the situation? Are you willing to ruthlessly deprive your only grandchild of a roof over his head? Doom an innocent child to a miserable existence in some horrible slum? Your salary as a beautician and Brian's as a technician are enough to rent a decent, comfortable place to live, Jessica said reasonably. What if I have serious complications with my pregnancy? Christine challenged. What if I can't work for the last few months? I need peace, stability, and security, not constant stress and moving around. Brian hugged his wife tighter and looked at me with pleading eyes. Mom, please, 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 for the sake of your future child, for the sake of my only grandchild. I could clearly see my son agonizingly torn between loyalty to his mother and loyalty to his pregnant wife. And I knew that not only the fate of this house was at stake, but the future of our entire family relationship. Brian, I said quietly but firmly, if Christine really is expecting a baby, I would be truly happy to be a grandmother for the first time. But that doesn't mean I have to continue to be disrespected in my own home. What disrespect? Christine shrieked theatrically. I have always been as polite and correct as possible with you. Planning my move into a nursing home without my consent is a courtesy? I asked right to the forehead. Christine blushed, but she persisted in her insistence. I never planned anything bad. I was genuinely thinking of your comfort and safety in your old age. My comfort in the nursing home, I clarified coldly, and my own comfort in my family home. Brian stood up from the table and paced nervously back and forth in the kitchen. I watched him agonizing inwardly, desperately trying to find a solution that would somehow satisfy everyone involved in the conflict. Okay, he said when he finally stopped. Let's say we do find a suitable apartment and move. But then what would happen to our family relations? Mom, are you really ready to lose your only son and your first grandchild forever because of this family quarrel? And are you really ready to lose your own mother forever because of your wife? I asked back, looking him straight in the eye. Brian froze and stared at me in silence for a long time. His tired eyes were filled with all kinds of conflicting feelings: sonly love, deep resentment, marital devotion, and fear of the future. Christine is my lawfully wedded wife, he said at last, slowly and firmly. The mother of my future child. I'm obliged to be on her side. Even if she is absolutely wrong? Even in that case, he answered painfully but firmly. Christine smiled triumphantly, realizing that she had won the decisive battle for her husband's loyalty and devotion. You see, Viola, she said with ill-concealed satisfaction, Brian understands that family and family ties are truly sacred, and if you make us permanently homeless, you automatically deprive yourself of a son and a future grandson. Think hard about that. I looked at Brian for a long time, at the middle-aged man I had once born and raised, to whom I had given the best years of my life and all my motherly love, and it pained me to realize that she'd lost him much earlier, that she'd just been unwilling to admit the obvious for a long time. A month, Jessica said icily. The decision is final and not subject to appeal. Christine jumped up and put her hands on her hips defiantly. Fine, but know this and remember this forever: when my baby is born, you will never see it. Never in your life. I will absolutely not allow my son or daughter to associate with such cruel, heartless people. That's your legal right, I replied with weariness in my voice. Brian took his wife's hand and headed toward the kitchen. Come on, Christine. We have to go to work. At the door, he turned around and looked at me one last time. Mom, I want you to know that I'm not making this choice for the good. I know, son, I said sadly, but you're making it anyway. 3 weeks after that memorable conversation in the kitchen, the house was finally empty. Brian and Christine moved out Tuesday morning while I was at the doctor's office for a routine checkup. They had deliberately chosen the timing of my absence to avoid any last unpleasant explanations and possible attempts at reconciliation. When I got home around noon, their belongings were gone, and their house keys were on the kitchen table next to a short letter from Brian. The note, written in his familiar, neat handwriting, said only the essentials. They'd found a one-bedroom apartment in a new development on the outskirts of town. Christine was doing well despite her pregnancy, and they hoped that things would eventually work out for the family. No apologies, no accusations, no emotions. Just a dry statement of facts, as if he was reporting to his bosses at the factory on the work done. Jessica arrived from Oregon the next day, having taken a 2-week vacation to help me clean up the house and take care of the backlog. She'd taken up residence in Brian's former room, which Christine had left in a strange state. Some of the furniture was gone. There were light stains on the walls from removed paintings and mirrors, and there were forgotten hangers and a few old magazines in the closet. Aunt Viola, said Jessica on the first morning, standing on the threshold of the empty bedroom. How are you feeling? Isn't the house a little quiet? I thought about the question, listening to the morning silence, which was now broken only by the birds singing outside the window and the distant sound of cars on the next street. For 2 years, I'd gotten used to the constant sounds of other people's lives, the TV on, the conversations in the kitchen, the slamming of doors and the clomping of heels on the stairs. You know, I admitted honestly. It's not quiet at all. On the contrary, it was as if the house was finally breathing a sigh of relief. And it was true. For the last few weeks, while Brian and Christine had been packing and packing, there had been a tense atmosphere of polite neglect in the house. We said hello in the morning, exchanged the requisite phrases about the weather and household chores, but no one attempted to discuss what had happened or make plans for the future. Christine held an emphatic dignity, as if she were magnanimously forgiving family grievances, while Brian seemed sullen and avoided long conversations. Now that they were gone, I was free to walk around my own house without fear of disapproval or hidden reproach. I could cook what I wanted, play the music I liked, and leave books on any table without fear of hearing remarks about clutter. Jessica and I started in the living room, where the signs of Christine's presence were especially noticeable. My niece took her silver-framed portraits off the walls and put them neatly in a box that we put in the closet in case Brian ever wanted them back. Instead of other people's pictures, we put the family pictures back where they belonged. Wedding portraits, pictures of Roger when he was young, pictures of Brian's childhood. Look, Aunt Viola, Jessica said, pulling a tattered picture out of the box. That's you and your mother and grandmother on the porch of the old house. In the black and white picture, my sister and I were flanked by our mother, two girls in matching dresses and pigtails. Margaret was about 7 years old at the time, and I was 9. Mom was holding our hands and smiling that calm smile I remembered well. The picture was taken in front of the old family home in Georgia that had long ago been torn down to build a shopping center. My mom told me about this house, Jessica continued, gently wiping the glass of the frame. She said you had a big porch where Grandma used to grow violets in clay pots. Yes, I nodded, accepting the picture, and a swing on the old oak tree in the yard. Your mom used to swing on it for hours, daydreaming about something of her own. We put the picture on the mantelpiece next to Roger's snuff box, which was back in its rightful place. Gradually, the living room took on its former appearance, becoming like its real self, cozy, settled, filled with the memory of the years we had lived here. In the kitchen, we found that Christine had taken away almost all the dishes she had bought during her time living in the house. The only things left were my old plates and cups, which she considered unfashionable, and a few pots that were too heavy to carry. But it didn't seem like a loss to me. On the contrary, now only the dishes I really cared about were on the shelves. Remember these cups? I asked, pulling out a fine hand-painted china from the sideboard. Of course I do, Jessica smiled. You always made me drink tea from the smallest one, the one with the roses. You said it was a special cup for special guests. We made tea and sat at the table by the window, just as we had done 20 years ago, when Jessica was a child and I was a young aunt who liked to spoil her niece with sweets and interesting stories. The same roses that Roger had planted, and the same sun shone outside the window. But life had changed beyond recognition. Aunt Viola, said Jessica, stirring her tea with a silver spoon, don't you regret what happened? Doesn't it hurt to lose your son? I thought for a long time about the answer to this difficult question that had been plaguing me for the last few weeks. You know, dear, I finally said, I didn't lose my son now. I lost him 2 years ago when he first let his wife make decisions for both of us. I just didn't want to admit it. And now? Now I realize that family isn't just about bloodlines. Family is people who respect you, care about your feelings, and don't try to run your life. You're closer to me now than my own son. Jessica reached out and covered my palm. I think so too. And you know what? I've decided to stay in Florida. There's nothing much keeping me in Portland. And here you are, and this house. But your job? I'll find a new one. There's plenty of travel companies in Florida. Or maybe I'll do something else entirely. I've got some savings and time to think. We sat around the table until evening, planning small changes in the house, discussing neighbors, and reminiscing about mutual relatives. The conversation flowed easily and naturally, without the tension and innuendo that had poisoned the atmosphere over the past months. As the sun began to set, I went out into the garden to water the roses, a habit I never gave up, even on the most difficult days. Jessica helped me, carrying the watering can and trimming the withered buds. Working in the garden always calmed me down, brought back a sense of normalcy. Roger used to say that roses are like people, I said, gently tilling the soil around a bush. They need attention and care, but not too much. If they're flooded or constantly disturbed, they get sick. He was a wise man, Jessica said. Yes, and he would have understood my decision. Roger never tolerated anyone trying to boss around his house. We finished the garden as it was beginning to get dark. Only a few rooms in the house had lights on. The others were still standing empty, waiting for us to get to them. But it didn't seem sad or frightening. It was just the house resting after a long period of strangers' presence. At dinner, we didn't talk about Brian or Kristen. Jessica talked about her plans to find a job in Florida, and I shared ideas on how to set up a room for her. We both realized that a new phase of life was beginning, maybe not what we had planned, but definitely honest and peaceful. Before going to bed, I stood at my bedroom window for a long time, looking out at the familiar street, the neighbor's house, the streetlights along the road, the mailboxes. Everything was in its place, just as it should be. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would meet it in my home, next to someone who respected me. Family does come in many forms. Sometimes the people closest to you by blood are strangers, and those whom fate has brought into your life become truly kin. It was a painful discovery, but at the same time, it was liberating.